Welcome again. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Darlene McLennan and I'm the Manager of the Australian Disability Clearinghouse on Education and Training, ADCET for short. This webinar is being live captioned. To activate the captions, click on the CC button in the toolbar that is located either at the top or the bottom of your screen. We also have the captions available via a browser and we'll pop that into the chat now so you can access them there as well. Okay, I am coming to you from Lutchwita, Tasmanian Aboriginal land. And in the spirit of reconciliation, ADCET respectfully acknowledges the Lutchwita nations and also recognises the Aboriginal history and culture of the land. And I pay my respects to elders, past and present, and to the many Aboriginal people that did not make elder status. I also want to acknowledge all the countries participating in this webinar today and also acknowledge their elders and ancestors and their legacy to us and to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are participating in this webinar today. Well, it's great to have you all join us. Today, the webinar, Sharing Stories and Ideas for Change with the Disability Royal Commission. It's being presented by Will Dewell, lawyer from Your Story Disability Legal Support. This presentation will provide information and also support from the Disability Royal Commission and how to use it as a means for storytelling and positive change in the tertiary sector. I think it's really important that tertiary is on the agenda of the Disability Royal Commission. As we're all aware, the more education we have in our lives, the better opportunities we get, the more sustainable employment we receive, and for people with disability, accessing tertiary education and succeeding in tertiary education is an important part of the life journey, our life journeys. Before we begin, a few more housekeeping details. As I said, this webinar is being live captioned by Bradley Reporting, and it is being recorded. The recording will be available on ADCET in the coming days. We also have Auslan interpreters who are spotlighted, so hopefully everybody's able to see them. If you have any technical difficulties, please email us at admin@adcet.edu.au. Will's going to talk to you, present to us for around 45 to 50 minutes. And at the end, we'll have questions. We will be managing the questions in the Q&A box, and we've enabled the upvote button. So you can, if you like a question, upvote it, and that will mean it'll get asked first. If you want to chat with each other or have any questions to the panelists, please use the chat box. If you want everybody to see your chat, please choose all panelists and attendees. We also are tweeting this, so we'll be using the hashtag DisabilityRC, capital R, capital C, and a capital D for disability. Also, you can hashtag ADCET. Okay, I think that's all the housekeeping. I will return at the end to ask your questions from the Q&A box. But now I'll hand over to you, Will. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Darlene. Thanks so much for having us today and inviting Your Story along to talk about this really important topic. And thank you to everyone for joining and Zooming in today. Just before we begin, I'll just get my slides and share them so we can follow along together. Just one moment.
Brilliant, it's Darlene here, and they are working. Thanks, Will.
Great, thank you. Okay, so my name is Will, as Darlene said, from Your Story Disability Legal Support. I would also like to add my acknowledgement of the traditional custodians of the land that I'm zooming in from and working on today, the Gadigal people, and extend that respect to elders past, present and emerging. Okay, so for today, we have about 45 minutes and there will be some time for questions, and the focus will be on these 3 topics on the screen. What is the Disability Royal Commission? How does it relate to post-secondary education? And how does our service, Your Story Disability Legal Support, fit in? Okay, so to start, what is the Disability Royal Commission? So the Royal Commission is a government inquiry of the highest level into the mistreatment of people with disability all across the country. So what the Royal Commission will be doing is gathering information and stories from all people, people with disability, and other people in the lives of people with disability, such as family members, carers, colleagues, supporters. So it opened on, in April 2019, and it closes, the submissions will close at the end of this year, the 31st of December 2022. And the final report will be handed down in September 2023. So we have until the end of this year to tell the Royal Commission our stories and make our submissions to help inform the Royal Commission's work. So what exactly are they looking at? So the Disability Royal Commission is looking at the experiences of people with disability in all settings and contexts. So that includes educational settings, as well as any other context you can think of, from workplaces to family homes, to hospitals or to group homes. And they're looking at the experiences of people in the past as well as to the present day. They define disability as any kind of impairment. So this could be physical or intellectual, cognitive impairment, psychosocial disabilities, such as mental health or autism, as well as cognitive impairments. So it's a very, very broad definition of disability, perhaps more broad than you would normally see in other government settings. So the Royal Commission wants to hear all of the good and all of the bad experiences that people have, as well as the good ones, and what we can take from those good experiences and implement them more broadly. So the focus really is on prevention and better protections from learning from those experiences. It's about achieving best practice in reporting, investigating and responding to mistreatment of people with disability, and ultimately to promote a more inclusive society for people with disability to live freely from mistreatment. So let's focus a little bit in on post-secondary education and what the Royal Commission has looked at so far. So the Royal Commission has made it quite clear that it is interested in the experiences of students with disability in all educational settings. And part of that is post-secondary education. But as we'll see, there hasn't been a huge focus on it. So there is a little bit of room there for more stories and information to be shared with the Commission. The Royal Commission really is a once in a generation opportunity for people to talk about what's working and what's not working in post-secondary education for students with disability, as well as for anyone working in the sector or other supporters of students. So the Royal Commission wants to hear from everyone. that they have a particular interest in first-hand or direct experiences, but as well as people closest to students. So by telling your story, you can help the Royal Commission to understand what is actually happening on the ground, and you can help them to make their recommendations so that they genuinely benefit your communities. So far, there have been a number of different issues papers and public hearings that the Royal Commission has produced and put on about education and some related topics looking towards employment. But you'll see that the focus has been more on the younger years and less so on post-secondary education. They started strongly with the first issues paper on education and learning. And when I say issues paper, it's really just a call out that the Royal Commission does on a particular topic where they ask for submissions. So they did that for inclusive education, received some responses back, and they've done that for a few different topics. And you would have seen the public hearings are the hearings that you'd see broadcast on TV that look a bit like a court. So there have been some relevant issues papers and some relevant public hearings, especially early on. Public hearings 2 and 7 were quite on point. And there is, in fact, you might have seen there is another public hearing coming up very soon, the 6th to the 10th of June, about the experience of young people and children in different educational settings. But again, it seems that there won't be a huge focus on post-secondary education. So what I'd like to do now is just focus on what they have looked at, specifically when it comes to post-secondary education. So there's been a few points have been raised so far. One is a focus on the problems or the barriers with course design and format, which can exclude students with disability. There are inherent requirements that exist at each institution, and these do vary between institution. And people have found that those requirements, or the universities or the TAFE or the institution can be quite inflexible with the way that they apply that. And that can become a barrier for students. Another point that has been raised already with the Royal Commission is the lack of a consistent national transition program for early school leavers or from year 12 to university or employment. However, generally, the most points that the Royal Commission has taken away so far really just broadly apply to education. So they don't really drill down on the specific issues within tertiary education. So I'll just skim through some of the key barriers that have already been raised about education more broadly for students with disability. One area is accessibility. So the Royal Commission has heard that physical accessibility, the accessibility of materials and communication is a significant barrier to inclusivity in education, and is a particularly significant problem in regional and remote areas. Another issue is gatekeeping. So the Royal Commission has heard about the denial of access to education, such as formal or informal discouragement of students to enrol or attend educational settings. Then there's the issue of limiting access, such as encouraging students with disability to take lower course loads or only take on partial enrolment. There's also discussion of a lack of reasonable adjustments, so the limitations or lack of availability to make reasonable adjustments, preventing full engagement from students. The Royal Commission has also heard about a lack of training or knowledge of the needs of students with disability across the education sector broadly. And finally, the Royal Commission has heard about negative culture and assumptions about students that can be a barrier to meaningful engagement. So that leaves us to what's missing. And no doubt everyone here will know more about this than I do, but that's really where you all come in. So I mean, some of what's missing includes the experiences of applying or enrolling in post-secondary education, the difficulty in obtaining employment after completing tertiary education, the positives of secondary education for students with disability, the empowerment, the dignity, and the protective element that comes with higher education. And finally, it does seem there is an absence of submissions coming from First Nations people, students from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, as well as LGBTIQ+ students with disability. So there's a lot to learn there. A lot the Royal Commission is missing, and so that's why today is important. So if that's got you thinking a little bit, here's where I can explain a bit further about how you actually do share your story to the Royal Commission. So your story can be very public or very private. You can make it as confidential as you would like, and you don't even have to give your name. In terms of format, it also doesn't have to be written. It can be spoken, recorded, by phone, video. It can even be an artwork. It can be done in person. It can be as short or as long as you like. And for the busy people out there, it can be as brief as a few lines or a few recommendations that you could just email through or call up and have a brief conversation with the Royal Commission. And you can tell your own story if you would like to explain your perspective on a situation or an issue. You can support someone else to tell their story, or with the other person's permission, you could tell their story on their behalf. And just a point on the due dates. I mentioned before that the submissions will close at the end of this year. But additionally, the end of June this year, so the end of next month, is the final date for private sessions, which is one way that you can tell your story quite confidentially. If you're interested in telling your story confidentially, you do have to register for a private session by the end of June this year. So how can we help? So the main function for us is legal advice. That's what we do, but it's not all we do. If you need information about referrals, we can help there. That's with other legal referrals for legal issues that aren't directly related to making a Royal Commission submission, or if you need connection to other services such as counselling or advocacy services for the Royal Commission, or any other referral, we can try to connect you with those other services that you need. And we do everything that we can to be actively involved and make sure that is a warm referral and not just information that we send out. And if you don't know where to start or who to contact, please contact us. We have a no wrong door policy, so we'll do everything we can to get you where you need to get to. So as I said, we primarily provide advice for people wanting to tell their story. We also provide support if that is helping with preparing for a private session, for example, or in some cases, we can help with preparing your story as well. We are independent from the Royal Commission, so we're a completely separate legal service. And as I said, we can connect you with other services as well that don't necessarily have to be legal. And finally, we are free, we are national, and we have staff in every state and territory, as well as a Aboriginal-led side of the service as well, that has staff employed by Aboriginal legal services around the country for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander clients. So why might you need legal advice? So I think it's important to say that not everyone will need legal support, but here are some of the reasons why you might. You might want your story to be private or confidential. You might want to name a person or an organization, particularly if you want to name someone publicly and say negative things about them. It's important to get advice. You might also like to get advice if you're concerned about someone seeing the submission and taking some kind of action against you or someone else. Or you're worried about some other kind of impact from your employer or colleagues or someone else that you have some kind of ongoing relationship with. But if you're not sure if you need legal advice, again, please contact us and we will book you in if legal advice is needed. Okay, so we're nearly through the slides. There's just a couple of stories now, just to give you a bit of an example of some of our clients' experiences and how they ended up speaking with us. So firstly, this is Jane. Jane is a student with disability studying at university. She requires a scribe to assist her with all of her written work. Her need for a scribe increased throughout the degree, so she applied for more support. The university did not support this request. Instead, the university made other suggestions, such as she change degree, reduce her units, or obtain funding for a scribe elsewhere. Jane took the university to an administrative tribunal to try to resolve the issue, but she didn't succeed. Jane wanted to tell her story to the Royal Commission, but she didn't know if she could name the university or talk about what happened at her legal tribunal proceedings. She approached Your Story. We advised her about what she can include in her story to the Royal Commission and how to tell it safely. And just one more example. This is Kim. She's a TAFE student. Kim is passionate about the accessibility and inclusivity of TAFE for all students. She has many positive and negative examples of experiences that she wants to tell the Royal Commission, but she doesn't want her fellow students or teachers to know about her submission. She's worried that other people will find out and make things harder for her at TAFE. Kim approaches Your Story. Your Story advises Kim how she can tell her story confidentially, and also how to get legal protection from any possible retribution. So some key takeaways from today. The Royal Commission really is a rare opportunity for reform and for change. And if there are experiences that you want to tell the Royal Commission, or if you have some really important ideas for improving the sector for students with disability, it's a really great opportunity to latch onto. The Royal Commission will stop taking submissions at the end of this year, the 31st of December. So it is important to start thinking about this in the coming months. And finally, we have a no wrong door policy. So if you're not sure about if you could make a submission, should you make a submission, how to do it, if there are any legal concerns, please contact us. So our details are on the screen here. If you'd like to speak with us or make a free legal appointment, there's the phone number, which is a free call, as well as our email address and the website. And the website has a number of really helpful resources about all of the things that I talked about today, which can be a helpful starting point to see what the issues are, what you might want to start thinking about, as well as a bit of information about how to prepare a submission. And there's also a form on our website if you'd like to make an appointment that way. And finally, we're always learning, and we would love to hear if you have any feedback about the presentation today. And I'd like to thank you so much for coming along, and I hope that you learned something helpful. And I think we'll take some questions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Will. It was great to hear, and it was wonderful to hear the stories too. Not that they were positive stories, but it was great to hear that students are feeling like, they can, tell their story, I suppose, especially if you didn't get a good outcome, maybe sharing it and some recommendations, once the Royal Commission finalises, that some things can change. And also when you talked about some of the issues that have been raised that are relating to the post-secondary education sector, very similar to, I think all of us have those experiences, and are glad to hear they're on the radar, and hopefully some change can come about. With that in mind, it'd be great for the people that are joining us today to actually think about some of those things too, and if there's big issues that you feel that haven't been addressed, maybe you could put them in the chat or the Q&A for us to kind of have a think about. And encourage everybody to put some questions into the Q&A box if you've got some questions for Will, and I will answer them. We have got a couple of questions. So one, and I know you talked about confidentiality and privacy, but there was a question of if a student or an organisation provides a submission, are they required to give evidence at the Royal Commission? And I think especially, for if you are, I think some of the issues and challenges for disability practitioners within the universities and TAFEs across the country is everybody's very passionate around students and students' access, but at the same time, you're employed by an organisation, so you're sometimes, kind of tied by that. So yeah, that kind of, if you put a submission in, could you then get called to talk to that?
It's very unlikely. For most people, you will make a submission in some format, and that will be that. If the Royal Commission does want to speak to you further, if they want you to speak at a public hearing, they will approach you. And generally, it will be your choice if you'd like to engage any further or if you would like to go to a public hearing. The Royal Commission really only makes a practice of compelling government institutions, for example. The Department of Education, for example, has been compelled, but they don't seem to be making a practice of compelling people with lived experience or their supporters. It's really a question of if they are interested in hearing from you further, they will approach you, and if you don't want to, you don't have to.
Thank you. A question we've also got is, as tertiary disability practitioners, do you have any advice for us about how to approach students or student groups to share their stories without raising the alarm or concerns of the broader university, senior leadership or administration? What things can we tell leaders to, and also, and then there's a second part to this question, is what things can we tell the leaders to assure them that it won't bring the university into disrepute?
Sure. So on the first point, I would encourage people to speak directly with us or with the Royal Commission and do that in a confidential way. So if there's concern about it raising an alarm, if you speak with us, especially if you speak with a lawyer, there is some significant confidentiality when there's a legal relationship. So you could speak with me or one of the other lawyers and talk through those options. And you could decide it's not for me, and that's totally fine. You can just get advice and walk away. Or if you decide to proceed, then we can connect you with a disability advocate and other services if you need that. But I suppose we're completely separate from the sector, and we're separate from the Royal Commission as well. So I think we have the independence and the confidentiality. So that would be my starting point to encourage people to do that.
Excellent.
And sorry, what was the second part?
The next
question?
one is, what things can we tell leaders to assure them that it won't bring the university into disrepute? So I suppose that reality is, if you want to encourage students to tell their story and so forth, that may be perceived by our administrators or our VCs as encouraging students to complain about the university. But I suppose it's things you could say to university that kind of makes them feel happy that you're encouraging students to have a voice in this process.
Sure. Well, I think firstly, it's important to remember that the Royal Commission is about the whole spectrum of experience. So it's not necessarily bad things. And secondly, the Royal Commission isn't really focused on individual institutions. So what the Royal Commission is really focused on is the bigger picture and the issues with all institutions, with all universities or TAFEs. It's about what laws and policies need to change or need to be brought in to make sure that the whole standard nationally is better. So I mean, it's true. I mean, you could name a specific institution, and the university or the institution may be a bit concerned about that. But it's the Royal Commission only in very limited, in only very few instances will they highlight an individual institution and make that a public thing. I think that's what you see publicly. That's what is publicized the most. but that really is a very small part of what the Royal Commission does. So the majority of the work is confidential and doesn't get to the public hearings.
Thank you. Fiona McLean is also here from Your Story and probably can add to a little bit to that question as well, answer to that question.
Hi, Darlene. Thanks for inviting me. Just to quickly comment, and one simple thing I wanted to say, and let me explain to my role, Manager of Stakeholder Relations. We often get that kind of question in relation to when we're trying to reach people who may not be receptive or may not be happy to be seen as being complained about, if that's often what it's sort of felt like in terms of the Disability Royal Commission and coming forward and sharing experiences and ideas. And the key thing to note on that is they are also interested in what works. So if you were presenting this or you were talking to your leaders, whether it's at university or try to encourage people to share information with a disability, a big selling point is to say, you know, actually, we've got good examples at this university or at this TAFE of what does and doesn't work, particularly what does work, you know, and we could use that to highlight that, you know, if funding's worked well in this area, and here's some good examples. So I think that can certainly allay a lot of people's concerns about why you'd want to encourage input and contributions. Yeah, and we've had some interesting experiences with that, particularly with a very closed environment, which is group homes. You would think, again, and we knew that it would be difficult to get in there because people would be seen as complaining about the very service that they're receiving. And that has definitely helped us to say, you know what, you might have actually something really positive to be used. And I do know the Disability Royal Commission is certainly looking for recommendations on improvement. So again, linking that together about the positive side of things.
Yeah, that's great. Another question was around systematic admin issues that sometimes cause barriers for students to access tertiary or the post-secondary education. And someone was asking, you know, is that too small fry? So they're kind of looking at the guidance on the scale of what kind of matters for the Disability Royal Commission.
This is another common question, and it's a really good one. The answer is there is no issue that's too small. The Royal Commission is looking at what you might feel is a small or a minor issue, and they're also looking at the most kind of extreme cases as well. So certainly the Royal Commission wants to hear about those smaller issues, and I think that they're really important because it may be that is a more common experience. I imagine, I hope that those extreme cases are, it's a smaller portion of everyone's experiences. So they are really important. The Royal Commission does want to hear those experiences as well. And I think part of the issue is that, again, you only see the public hearings, which often are fairly dramatic, and you can hear some truly horrifying things, but the Royal Commission, a huge bulk of what the Royal Commission hears is everyday experiences. They're really important.
Great, thank you. It's hard to get away from what we see in the media, I think, sometimes. But yeah, just hearing some of the things you said before kind of, got me thinking about some of the things I think would be really good as a sector for us to share. So with that in mind, one of the questions is, does the Commission accept group submissions put forth or collated by a group of people?
Yes, they do. So a group could put it together in any of those formats I mentioned. You could put together something written, you could record yourselves speaking, or put something together in any way you can think of. The only note I will say from a legal point of view is if any of those legal issues that I mentioned come to mind, then you would have to get individual legal advice, so that we can make sure everyone involved in that group submission has had their own confidential advice.
thank you. Another one is going back to when you talked about government departments can be compelled. The question is also, can organisations that are government funded be compelled?
So anyone can be. It's just a question of practice of what the Royal Commission does. So yes, I couldn't say for certain that anyone is not going to be compelled. It just seems that the practice of the Royal Commission is generally to have more of a discussion and invite people in to figure out if someone would like to speak at a public hearing. But yes, it's possible. It's possible.
Great, thank you. Now we have a more personal question from somebody is, I have an analog typewriter which I would be happy to use instead of a computer. It has no electronics and prints directly to paper. I've had a scribe in the past and hated it. What can I do instead of scribing? So I don't know if it's something that you can answer, or is that kind of a story that can be told? So
I'm happy to sort of partially respond, and maybe I invite Will to add on to that. But I mean, we can't obviously provide any direct advice today, but I think it is a good example about how we can assist people and the kind of things we do support people with beyond the Disability Royal Commission. It's people do have individual issues that they need addressed. And as Will mentioned, I think in his presentation, that if we can't help you with that, if it's not specific to something, the Disability Royal Commission can fix, obviously not directly. We can certainly try and refer to people who can do that. But also, again, I mean, it's an example that's still also worth sharing. If that's something, that person's experience, it's worth explaining that issue and actually how it should be addressed to improve their inclusion in our society. So if that's what works for them, I think that's really an important example, and thanks for raising that, whoever did. I also just wanted to quickly go back to a couple of things that we've already covered, because I think that there is an important message here too. I think someone was talking about the levels of stories, like the significance, the levels of mistreatment and so on. And as Will said too, a common barrier, we hear it all the time. Why would people want to hear from me? What's, not that bad that's happened to me. In the grand scheme of things, haven't got anything to complain about. And as Will correctly said, the more they hear about it, the better informed, particularly from people with the direct and lived experience. But I also think it's important to recognise the value for the individual sharing that information, that experience. So one thing we have had feedback you may not see immediate change, and you may be only commentating or contributing, should I say, to national recommendations and national discourse around this. But for the individual, it can also be an experience very healing or very vindicating to be listened to respectfully about what that issue is, and because everybody's story does count. Everybody does have something to contribute. So if there is one thing I'd take away, if you could take away from today, amongst the many things you've heard, is everybody's insights, whether you are a person with a disability, whether you are working in the profession to support others who have a disability, you have a loved one, whatever it is, your contribution matters, and the more they hear it, the better informed they will be with the recommendations.
Thanks, Fiona. I feel like I want to end it on that because it was so powerful, but there is another question.
No. I'm loving the questions. It's great. It's great that everyone's engaged.
So just one of the questions was, how do you think the rollout of the recommendations from the Royal Commission is going to be affected by COVID, if that will have an impact?
I think it's the $1 million question. We know that COVID has affected the running of the Royal Commission itself. That goes without saying. And we know that the Royal Commission has focused a little bit on COVID as well, with the issues papers and the public hearing. But we don't really know about the rollout. because, you know, all we really know is the Royal Commission will feed everything that it has learnt about the impact of COVID on how it's run and the lives of people with disability and students with disability, and it will feed that into its recommendations to government. But then it's over to the government of the day to decide what to implement, how to implement it, and you know what the COVID environment is at that time. So it's a very difficult one to know, but I hope it won't be affected.
Thank you. And Fiona, did you want to say something?
Always, unfortunately, I've always got something to chime in. Because actually, Will and I were having a good chat about it, this question, prior to, because I kind of slightly took it, we took it in two different ways. But I guess really one thing to say is if you do have any thoughts about how it should be impacted, again, this is your chance to contribute to that. So if there is a recommendation that should be there in retrospect or in light of COVID, you have an idea, send it through. And the more informed or the more ideas, the better. And they are really seeking those ideas too, not just the experiences, but the solutions as well.
That's great. Well, thank you both. We've come to the end of our questions. It was really informative, and I think on that positive note, I think what you were saying, Fiona, about the solutions also and the good practice that's happening out there too would be lovely to highlight as a part of this. Fiona, if you want to put the link in again to the survey that so for people can fill that in, which will be in the chat box for people to access. And just to give a plug that our next webinar is going to be Caption.ed product demo. I think Jane will put a link into the chat too for that one. And our next one, well, not our next one, but one that we've got coming up in July is around a research paper that was undertaken, which is around leveraging student voices to strengthen student support, which kind of aligns very much with what's been talked about today. So we'll put that link in as well. So thank you both for your presentation. Actually, I've just see that there might be another question. What form will the recommendations take from the Royal? Okay, so what form will the recommendations take from the Royal Commission? Can institutions be compelled to accept them? Good question.
It's a cracker. Do you want to have a go, Will? I mean, I think I'm happy to if you'd like to, either way. But I was actually just going to pop something in the chat. So if you want to start, and I can follow.
Sure. So the recommendations themselves are not legally binding. The recommendations will go to government, then they will decide from there what happens. So it's possible, though, at that point, the Royal Commission could make laws that do compel institutions or anyone to do anything, or best practice standards or policies that must be followed. So it is possible that this could lead to legal obligations, but the recommendations themselves from the Royal Commission are not legally binding.
Great, thank you. And Fiona, last word there, you're right.
I gave it a plug, our webinar, but yeah, no, I totally agree. Sadly, they're not, but they definitely do send a very loud message to the Australian public. They are used as a sort of, for whatever another language, like a gold standard that everyone has to measure and report against. So yeah, but yes, they're not going to necessarily fix, but they are going to send a message about what we should be striving for. And that's, I think, an important start in fixing things.
Yeah, thank you. All right, well, thank you both for giving up your time today and sharing what role you play in this, and hopefully it will generate contacts to you so people can actually have some confidence in if they do want to present, that they've got someone to, somewhere to go to actually talk that out and what the implications are. So thank you for sharing your knowledge and how we can go about it. It's really important. We'll be sending out an email with a survey to everybody and also a link to the recording in the coming days. Thank you to the interpreters and the captioner. And I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day. So thank you, Will, and thank you, Fiona. It was great to hear from you both. Take care.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Darlene. Thanks, everyone.
Take care, everyone.